Hi, I'm Nancy Chanteau, and this video is about human homework, asking for 100% of what you want, or doing 100% life design, and then moving from a life that is something that we are experiencing based on trying to be good enough or be lovable or matter enough, moving from that kind of model into a life that we've designed, a life that is defined by our wise adult consciousness. So essentially you want to think about when we're operating within the orientation around our life that we're not good enough or there's something wrong with us. That orientation is coming from a place of individualism in our culture, in which we think that when we're experiencing powerlessness or something is wrong with our lives or our circumstances, that if there was something wrong with us, then we could fix it. And if there's something wrong with us and we can fix it, then we would have power over our circumstances. So it's really a desperate wish fulfillment, a desire to be able to have power over our powerlessness. And it makes sense that we would want that in an individualistic culture, because powerlessness and danger when we're starting out as infants is the same thing. As we grow up, our powerlessness and our danger start to diverge, and yet we are not very often in environments that teach us to accept our powerlessness, to distinguish between powerlessness and danger, and to learn to, by accepting our powerlessness, reserve our energy and focus on what we can do. So we end up spending a lot of energy trying to solve our powerlessness as if it were dangerous to us, and as if it was our fault, as if there was something wrong with us that was making us powerless. And this just isn't true. In radical therapy, the root lineage of Skills for Change, which was the mental health arm of the Berkeley Free Clinic, the way they talked about this kind of not good enough, not belonging, not being lovable, not mattering, this mental construct of trying to deal with our powerlessness, they called it internalized oppression, that it was associated with shame in the body, and that they would call it pig. They called it pig to remind us that at the time in the 60s when they were working in the Berkeley Free Clinic, the pigs were cops on the street, and they wanted to remind us that these are internalized values, that they're not necessarily our value system, and they're based on dominant culture. And they called it deserve to die, that this method of this way of thinking about us not being good enough, never being good enough, not being lovable, not mattering, not being important, not belonging, that is really has at its core a nihilism, a self-annihilation. And most people really want the antidote to deserve to die, to not being good enough, to being good enough. That we say positive affirmations of being good enough, and somehow that's going to counterbalance the feeling of not being good enough. Well, unfortunately, that doesn't tend to work. The reason it doesn't tend to work is because our negative stories about ourselves are backed by our safety system. Our safety system is recognizing danger and powerlessness, and it's identifying that there's something wrong and it needs to go into fight or flight. Our fight-flight system kicks off, and then all these biological, psychobiological responses happen. One of the most important things to note is that our neocortex are the latest brain to develop, that part of us that is able to discern and think in complexity and contradiction. That part of us is less available when we're in a triggered fight-flight state, fight-flight freeze, tend and befriend, toward, dissociate, these responses to danger. And we treat our powerlessness as if it's dangerous to us, even when it isn't. And so it's that response to our powerlessness is fueled, those negative stories are fueled by our safety system, whereas the positive stories aren't. So the positive stories just can't win. What can actually make a difference is surrounding the experience of getting triggered with our consciousness, really bringing our consciousness to our bringing our consciousness to our experience, witnessing our experience, identifying and labeling our experience, and then from there accepting it and being able to make discernment about whether or not it's dangerous to us, how to respond. That consciousness is much more potent, and it's going to give us a lot more to work with. So instead of going from deserve to live to deserve to die to deserve to live, from going from not good enough to good enough, we want to get rid of the deserve. We want to cut that out altogether. And instead of and once we've got rid of deserve, so there's just live or die, then we're left with you're either dead or you're alive. If you're alive, what do you want? Now, there's an additional level of complexity. We can't just work with from what we want at that moment. Oftentimes, what we need to do is something I like to call our human homework. Our human homework is anything that has to be taken care of in order for us to feel well and whole. This can be anything from dealing with a chronic disease, dealing with an addiction, dealing with a lack of fitness in some way, or dealing with systemic ongoing oppression. Whatever our human homework is, some people have immense amounts of human homework and some people have very little human homework. What I've noticed is that the people who do their human homework tend to do much better than the people who don't. If somebody has very little human homework and they don't do it, they might be suicidal, whereas somebody who has immense amounts of human homework but does it has a good life. They're functional, they're able, they're doing well in their lives and in the world. So doing our human homework is really a distinguisher. Once we do our human homework, one of the things that happens is that the human homework stops being a cost to us and starts, the work we did in order to do it starts being a benefit, a source of power. So as we stop having the drain of not doing our human homework, we are getting the power of having done it. And then that power becomes a resource for us to get to do what we want. So when we first get rid of this whole deserve idea and we stop trying to organize around deserving to live instead of deserving to die, then we still need to do our human homework. As we do our human homework, then we can start designing our life. What do I want? And that is unto itself a radical question. What's 100% of what I want 100% of the time? And starting to work from there. The process of doing our human homework and our 100% design, that can be incredibly rewarding. And when we arrive at that place, I say that we've switched over from trying to solve our problems by fixing ourselves to a life where we're designing our life. And we're still going to have life circumstances. Things are still going to happen to us, and we get to design our response. So I hope this helps make the switch from operating from this child and parent consciousness, where we're desperately trying to avoid our powerlessness, to being in a full life design where we accept our powerlessness and then do what we can. That shift is a little bit clearer. Thanks very much. I hope this was helpful.